Emily Morgan never imagined that the perfect life she built with her husband Daniel would come crashing down. When Daniel was found murdered in their home, the police called it a robbery gone wrong. But as Emily began to dig deeper, she uncovered a horrifying secret about her husband's hidden life. A dangerous web of lies, crime, and betrayal. As Emily's search for answers led her into the heart of a criminal underworld, she discovered that the shocking truth behind Daniel's death was far darker than she could have ever imagined. Who could she trust and who was responsible for ending her husband's life? The closer she got to the truth, the more deadly the game became. Emily and Daniel Morgan's life was the epitome of suburban perfection. They lived in a large, beautiful home on a quiet street, where neighbors waved and children played in the front yards. To the outside world, they were the ideal couple. Two people who had it all: a lovely home, two wonderful children, and careers that seemed to fulfill every dream. Daniel worked as a successful financial advisor, often praised for his work ethic and integrity. Emily, a devoted mother and wife, had put her career on hold to raise their children, always active in their school and social lives. For years, everything seemed perfect. They shared everything: family dinners, vacations, weekend outings, and were known to be inseparable. But as time passed, Emily started noticing subtle changes in Daniel. He was often absent for long stretches of time, attending work events or late meetings that didn't seem to have any clear purpose. He became distant, and their conversations, once full of warmth and laughter, grew cold. He would spend hours on his laptop, rarely looking up or engaging in family time. Emily brushed off these changes at first. She assumed it was just the stress of work piling up on Daniel, or the natural ebb and flow of a long marriage. However, the cracks started to deepen. Daniel stopped coming home at regular hours, sometimes staying out late with vague explanations. Emily tried to reach out, but he would always reassure her that it was nothing to worry about, that everything was fine. The kids started to ask where their father was, and Emily, always the calm presence, told them that Daddy had a lot of work to do. She didn't want them to worry. But inside, her unease grew. She had always trusted Daniel, but now, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. One evening after the kids had gone to bed, Emily decided to do something she hadn't done before. She started going through Daniel's things. She didn't suspect infidelity. Rather, she was looking for some sign that would explain his erratic behavior. She rifled through his office, his dresser drawers, and his briefcase, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Still, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't adding up. There had to be an explanation for his late nights, the strange phone calls, the unexplained absences. But what could it be? The next morning, Emily's life would be turned upside down. She woke up to find the house eerily quiet. The children were still asleep, and Daniel, as usual, had left early for work. It wasn't until the doorbell rang that everything changed. Two police officers stood at the doorstep, their faces grim. They asked her if she was Emily Morgan, and when she confirmed, they informed her that her husband had been found dead in their home. Daniel was dead, shot in the chest. No one had heard anything. No one had seen anyone come or go. The officers said it looked like a robbery gone wrong, though there was no sign of forced entry. The house was perfectly in order, and there was nothing missing. The police told her that they were still investigating but didn't have many leads. They would need to speak with her further, but for now she should sit tight. Emily's world felt like it was collapsing in slow motion. How could this have happened? Why her husband? What could possibly explain this senseless tragedy? The grief hit her like a tidal wave. But amid the shock and devastation, another feeling began to take root. A suspicion. a quiet whisper in the back of her mind that something wasn't right. She couldn't put her finger on it, but everything about the situation felt wrong. It was as if there were things hidden beneath the surface that no one, not even the police, had discovered yet. But what could those things be? What had Daniel been involved in? The answers seemed just out of reach, and yet Emily felt that if she could find them, it might be the key to understanding the nightmare her life had become. As the days passed, Emily's grief turned into confusion and suspicion. The police had not made much progress in the investigation. Daniel's death, while tragic, was puzzling. There was no sign of forced entry, no witnesses, and nothing stolen from their home. The initial assumption was that a robbery had gone wrong, but something about the scenario didn't sit right with Emily. Daniel had always been cautious about security, and there were no signs that anyone had been inside the house aside from him. It didn't add up. In the days that followed, Emily found herself digging deeper into the mystery of Daniel's life. She was given access to his personal belongings, his emails, bank accounts, and phone records, as part of the investigation. Though she had already spent years with Daniel, she felt like she didn't know him at all. What she found was shocking. She started by looking at their bank accounts. She had always trusted Daniel to manage their finances, and he had done so without issue. But now Emily noticed unusual transactions, large sums of money being transferred to unknown accounts. One payment in particular stood out, a massive withdrawal from their joint account, made just 2 days before Daniel's death. The amount was staggering. Emily's heart raced as she realized she had never seen this transaction before. The more she looked, the more she discovered. There were other unexplained transfers, including some that led to offshore accounts. She had no idea what this meant, but it was clear that Daniel had been involved in something shady. These transactions were made at odd hours, and some were even set up as recurring payments. But to whom? And why had Daniel never mentioned anything about these transfers? Emily felt her world tilting again, as if the man she thought she knew had been hiding something dark and dangerous. The police didn't have much information at first. They followed the trail of money, but it was complicated. The accounts were carefully hidden, and the money seemed to be moving through several layers of shell companies. Still, the investigators told Emily that they were making progress. They suggested she focus on taking care of herself and her family while they worked through the financial details, but Emily couldn't let go. Every night after the kids had gone to bed, she stayed up late searching through Daniel's things. She went through his old files, his personal papers, and even his phone. Nothing felt like it belonged to the man she had known for so long. There were encrypted files on his computer and locked folders on his phone. She tried to access them, but without the passwords, she was stuck. It was becoming clear that Daniel had been keeping secrets from her, things he had been hiding for a long time. She couldn't shake the feeling that these secrets were somehow connected to his death. At one point, Emily found a set of keys in one of Daniel's jackets. They were unusual, rusted and old, not like anything she had seen before. They didn't seem to belong to any of the doors in their house, nor did they match the keys to their cars. The keys felt out of place, like they were meant for something else entirely. Emily's curiosity pushed her further. She didn't know what they unlocked, but she had to find out. The mystery was eating at her, and her need for answers had grown far beyond just her grief. Emily eventually discovered that the keys opened a storage unit on the outskirts of town. Daniel had rented it months before his death, and it was something she had never known about. This discovery changed everything. Daniel had been hiding something in that unit, and she was determined to find out what. With the help of a private investigator, Emily decided to look into it further. The investigator was skeptical at first, but agreed to help her break into the storage unit and uncover whatever secrets Daniel had kept hidden away. What they would find there would be the first real clue to understanding the life Daniel had been living behind closed doors. and Emily feared it might also hold the key to his death. Emily stood outside the storage unit, her heart pounding in her chest. The facility was quiet, tucked away on the edge of town in a forgotten industrial area. The air smelled of dust and rust, and the silence felt heavy, oppressive. She had no idea what she would find inside, but she had to know. The keys Daniel had left behind led her here, and she couldn't ignore the feeling that this was the answer to the questions that had haunted her since his death. The private investigator, a man named Alan, had reluctantly agreed to help her. He was skeptical at first, thinking the storage unit might contain nothing more than old household items or boxes of irrelevant paperwork. But Emily was desperate, and after weeks of feeling like she was drowning in confusion and suspicion, she couldn't ignore her gut. She had to see for herself. They approached the unit in silence, Emily's hands shaking as she fumbled with the rusty keys. Alan stood beside her, his face tense, his eyes scanning the surroundings. The dull hum of the distant freeway was the only sound that filled the air. When the key finally slid into the lock, it clicked open, and Emily's heart raced. She pushed the door open, and a musty smell hit her nostrils. Inside there were stacks of boxes, old furniture draped in sheets and various odds and ends. Nothing looked out of the ordinary at first glance, but something about it felt wrong. It felt like Daniel had carefully curated every inch of this space to keep his secrets hidden. The light was dim inside the unit, but they could still make out a few notable items: old paintings, a set of golf clubs, some luggage, and stacks of paper. As Emily moved further into the space, she noticed a large metal filing cabinet tucked in the far corner, its drawers locked. She approached it with a mix of anticipation and dread, knowing that whatever was inside might change everything. Alan followed her, carefully inspecting the room as if expecting to find something more sinister. Emily pulled at the locked drawer, but it wouldn't budge. Her frustration grew, but then Alan moved past her and pulled out a tool from his bag. He managed to pry open the drawer with ease, and Emily held her breath as he slid it open. Inside, there were stacks of neatly organized folders and documents. Her fingers trembled as she reached for the first one. She opened it, and her heart sank as she began to read. It was a series of financial documents, bank statements, contracts, and invoices. But these weren't just ordinary papers. They were evidence of a web of illegal transactions. The names on the papers were unfamiliar, but the amounts were staggering. The documents painted a picture of Daniel E.'s involvement in something much darker than Emily had ever imagined. There were records of offshore accounts, questionable investments, and wire transfers to accounts in countries known for money laundering and illicit activities. But that wasn't all. As Emily flipped through the folders, one name kept appearing: Mark Stevens. It was a name she had never heard before, but it appeared again and again in connection with Daniel's financial dealings. Then, Emily found something even more chilling: a set of photos hidden in the back of one of the folders. The pictures were blurry, taken from a distance, but they clearly showed Daniel in meetings with people she didn't recognize. Some were in lavish restaurants, others in private, dimly lit rooms. But in all of them, Daniel looked uncomfortable, as if he were trying to hide from the camera. It was clear he had been involved in something he didn't want her to know about, something he had kept hidden from her for years. The more Emily looked through the documents, the clearer it became that Daniel had been laundering money for a criminal organization. The financial records were full of illegal transactions, money moving in and out of accounts with no legitimate explanation. There were also records of large bribes paid to individuals in positions of power. Daniel, once a man she had admired for his integrity and work ethic, had been living a double life. He was mixed up in something far worse than a simple affair or financial trouble. Emily felt her world begin to unravel. This was not the man she had loved, the man she had trusted. He had betrayed her in ways she couldn't even comprehend. The grief and anger that had consumed her since his death began to twist into something else, something darker. She couldn't understand how Daniel had become involved in this. But there was one thing she knew for sure. His murder was tied to these criminal activities. Someone had silenced him, and she was determined to find out who. But there was still so much she didn't know. Why had Daniel kept all of this from her? And more importantly, who was Mark Stevens, the mysterious figure at the center of everything? Emily's heart raced as she closed the file drawer, the weight of the discovery sinking in. She had thought she was uncovering a simple truth about her husband's death. Instead, she had stumbled upon a dangerous underworld that would lead her down a path she wasn't sure she could survive. As Emily stood there surrounded by the evidence of her husband's secret life, the magnitude of her discovery hit her like a freight train. The documents, the photos, the names, all of it pointed to something she never could have imagined. Daniel, the man she had loved and trusted for 15 years, was involved in criminal activities. He had been laundering money, making shady deals, and associating with dangerous individuals. But the discovery of Mark Stevens' name repeated across the papers was a mystery that couldn't be ignored. The question that consumed her mind was simple yet chilling. Who was Mark Stevens and why was Daniel so deeply entangled with him? Emily couldn't shake the feeling that this man held the key to understanding what had led to her husband's death. The police had been vague in their investigation, offering little in the way of answers, and Emily had grown tired of waiting for them to piece it all together. She had to take matters into her own hands. With the help of the private investigator, Alan, Emily began to dig deeper into Mark Stevens. He wasn't just some random name in a ledger. He was a figure connected to a series of dangerous, high-stakes financial crimes. Stevens had a history of involvement with organized crime syndicates, and his name had popped up in connection with several cases of fraud, money laundering, and even extortion. What unsettled Emily the most was the fact that Stevens had managed to stay under the radar, with no solid evidence ever linking him directly to any criminal activity. He was a ghost, and now Emily suspected he might also be the reason Daniel was dead. Alan used his contacts to track down a few leads, but the closer they got, the more dangerous things seemed. Stevens was a man with a lot of power, and his network was vast. There were whispers of ties to powerful figures in the underworld, people who would stop at nothing to protect their interests. As Alan dug deeper, he found that Stevens had been in town just days before Daniel's death, meeting with several individuals in secret locations. Emily's heart raced as she realized that Daniel had been caught in a web of deceit, one that had led him into the clutches of a ruthless criminal. One evening, Alan came to Emily with news. He had managed to get in touch with a former associate of Mark Stevens, a man who had worked with him in the past. This contact, named Jake, had a reputation for being loose-lipped when it came to discussing Stevens' business. Emily and Alan arranged to meet him in a run-down diner on the outskirts of town. When they arrived, Jake was already sitting at a corner booth, his face hidden in the shadows. The air between them was thick with tension, but he agreed to speak. Jake told them that Stevens had been pressuring Daniel for weeks, demanding larger sums of money in exchange for protection in the business dealings Daniel had become involved in. Daniel had grown increasingly uneasy with the pressure, but he had no choice. Backing out of the deal would have meant severe consequences. Jake confirmed that Daniel had tried to distance himself from Stevens, but the criminal network surrounding him wasn't so easily escaped. As Jake spoke, Emily's mind raced. This wasn't just about money. It was about control. Stevens had used Daniel's financial expertise to move money through his network, and when Daniel tried to pull away, Stevens had made sure he couldn't. But there was more. Jake revealed that Daniel had recently made a plan to expose Stevens and his operation to the authorities. Emily's heart sank. Her husband had been trying to get out, to do the right thing, but it was too late. Stevens found out about Daniel's intentions, and with that knowledge, Emily realized her husband had become expendable. Someone had killed him to keep him quiet, to ensure that their criminal activities wouldn't be exposed. The implications of Jake's story were staggering. Daniel hadn't been killed by a random thief or a disgruntled client as the police had initially suggested. He had been murdered to protect Mark Stevens and the criminal network he represented. Emily's mind reeled with the weight of the truth. Her husband had been caught in a dangerous game, and in the end he had paid the ultimate price. But there was still more to uncover. Jake's information had brought clarity, but it had also opened up even more questions. Who exactly had pulled the trigger? Was Stevens involved directly, or had he used someone else to do his dirty work? And what was Emily supposed to do with this knowledge? The investigation had just taken a dark turn, and as the pieces began to fit together, Emily realized that she was no longer just a widow grieving the loss of her husband. She was now a woman caught in a deadly game with people who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. With each new revelation, Emily's fear grew. She had already lost Daniel, but the truth had the potential to cost her even more. As the days turned into weeks, Emily's quest for answers became all-consuming. The more she uncovered, the more she realized the depth of the web Daniel had been entangled in. What began as a search for closure after her husband's tragic death had spiraled into a dangerous journey into the underworld of crime and corruption. Every answer she found only raised more questions, and with each revelation she felt herself being pulled deeper into a world she wasn't prepared for. The private investigator, Alan, had done everything he could to help her, but even he was starting to show signs of unease. The information they had gathered about Mark Stevens and the criminal organization he was connected to was damning, but it also made them both vulnerable. Stevens had a network of powerful, dangerous people who could and would stop at nothing to protect their interests. The closer Emily came to the truth, the more she felt the weight of that danger pressing down on her. One afternoon, just as Emily was beginning to consider going to the authorities with what she had learned, she received a mysterious message. It was an encrypted email, the sender anonymous, but the subject line sent a chill down her spine. "You're getting too close. Stop looking." Emily's hands trembled as she opened the message. It contained a warning, a clear, unmistakable threat. Someone didn't want her to keep digging. Fear gripped her, but Emily refused to back down. She had come too far to stop now. She knew that Daniel's murder wasn't just a tragic incident. It was the result of a dangerous power struggle, and she was now part of it. Her next step was clear. She needed to confront Mark Stevens. Alan helped Emily set up a meeting with one of Stevens's former associates, someone who might be able to give her more concrete details about the network Stevens controlled. They arranged to meet at a quiet, secluded park, far from prying eyes. The tension between Emily and Alan was palpable. Emily was determined, but the danger of what they were about to do weighed heavily on both of them. This wasn't just a confrontation for the truth. It was a confrontation with a man who could end her life in an instant if he felt threatened. When they arrived at the park, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the empty benches. The air felt thick with anticipation. After a few minutes, a figure appeared in the distance. Tall, dressed in a long coat, his face obscured by the brim of his hat. Emily's heart skipped a beat. This was the man who could change everything. The man who could finally reveal who had been behind her husband's death. The meeting was tense, full of half-spoken words and nervous glances. Alan stayed in the background, his presence a quiet support as Emily took the lead. The man, whose name was Richard, was hesitant at first, clearly afraid of being seen or even overheard. But after a few moments, Emily's persistence wore him down. Richard revealed that Stevens had indeed been aware of Daniel's plan to expose him. However, it wasn't just about money. Stevens had grown paranoid. He feared that Daniel's actions would unravel everything he had worked for, from his criminal empire to his carefully constructed network of corrupt officials. The most shocking detail came next. Richard confirmed that Stevens had ordered Daniel's murder. But the chilling part? Stevens hadn't been the one to pull the trigger. He had used someone from within his circle, someone who knew Daniel personally. Emily's stomach twisted as she realized what that meant. Daniel had been betrayed by someone he trusted. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Someone close to them had been involved in his murder. The next piece of the puzzle fell into place. Stevens' associate was not just some low-level goon. The person responsible for Daniel's death was someone Emily knew well, someone who had been in their life for years. The betrayal ran deeper than she could have imagined. The person who had helped arrange Daniel's murder had been standing beside her all along, pretending to be part of the family, when in reality they had been playing their part in the darkness. Her heart raced as the pieces clicked into place. Emily knew the identity of the killer, but confronting them would be dangerous, risky. Yet she couldn't back down. Daniel deserved justice, and she would see that it was done. The truth had set her on a path she couldn't escape. It had torn her life apart, leaving her alone, broken, and afraid. But Emily had found the courage to confront the darkness no matter the cost. The journey had been long, full of twists and turns, and the danger was far from over. But one thing was clear. No matter how high the stakes, she was ready to face whatever came next. For Daniel, for the truth, and for the justice that had eluded her for so long.